Welcome to Storybounders. I'm Jamie.
And I'm Steve.
Here at Storybounders, we're all about helping you fill your story reservoir, one story at a time.
The stories we love and believe in don't just entertain us, they shape our lives. And if we let them, they can even change the world.
And today, we've got a great story for you. Welcome back, everyone. We'd like to say hi to all of our old-timers. Thanks for being here with us from week to week. We really appreciate you.
Am I one of the old-timers? Who are the old-timers? Is the old people?
The ones that have just been here all
from
along.
From the beginning. Oh,
yes.
Not necessarily the ones that are my age.
Yes. No. It doesn't have anything to do with age. It has everything to do with, I guess, loyalty. I don't even know.
You're an old-timer.
You're an old-timer.
I like it.
Yeah. And if you are new to the Storybounders podcast, we welcome you. We are so glad that you're here with us. And if you are unsure about what you've gotten yourself into, we invite you to listen to our very first episode that introduces and explains the idea of story reservoirs. This will give you a better understanding of what we do here at Storybounders and why we're so obsessed with stories. We love to share stories through our podcast, our pop-up bookshop where we help people curate their own private libraries, and our events where we immerse guests in the world of a great story.
And speaking of immersive events, this January we're throwing a party Robbie Burns himself would crash. Think tartan as far as the eye can see, bagpipes that'll rattle your teacup, and food so hearty you'll swear you've grown a kilt. We'll swap cheeky stories, belt out poetry, and maybe let you grab the mic, if you're feeling bold. Come for the haggis, stay for the mischief. Burns Night awaits. We'll have the details available on our website in the next few weeks. Tickets will go on sale September 1st. You will not want to miss this event. It's one of our favorites.
In 2026, America turns 250, and we're celebrating all year long. From the arrival of the Mayflower to the moon landing, we'll journey through the defining chapters of our nation's story. But this isn't just history. It's the heart and soul of America, told through its literature, music, poetry, and film. Join us bi-weekly as our podcast explores the people, places, and pivotal moments that shaped us, stories that remind us who we are, inspire us to be better, and honor those who came before. Together, we'll rekindle our faith in the principles that built this remarkable nation. Join us for one of the most powerful stories you'll ever experience. What do Benjamin Franklin, Mark Twain, Eleanor Roosevelt, and John-Boy Walton have in common? They all came from big families. I've been pondering on an article that I read on the subject of large families for many months now, and I thought I'd share it with you today. The author Michael Barone asks the question, why was America in the Revolutionary War era with 3 million people able to generate leaders of the quality of Benjamin Franklin and George Washington, while today's America, with 333 million people, generates the likes of President Joe Biden and President Donald Trump? Okay, now try not to be offended. Our goal is not to make any kind of particular commentary on our current president or the one who came before. But I have heard many grumblings from all corners of my life about how we don't have anyone worth voting for anymore. Voting season is stressful and disappointing for many, as we are desperate for someone to show the leadership and charisma of some of our past leaders like Washington, Lincoln, Roosevelt, JFK, and Reagan. Although we're focusing on U.S. presidents, Barone's question could apply to any area of our personal and public lives that needs good leadership. Barone asks, could larger families produce better leaders, as in the days of the early nation? In his article, Barone references another author, Tim Carney, who wrote a book entitled Family Unfriendly, which argues that more people should have more children, that governments and employers should make that easier, and that parents should, as the title of his first chapter reads, have lower ambitions for your kids. Let's look at some examples of what Carney means from our most venerated leaders. Most of the founders of our nation grew up in large families, with an average of 7 to 8 children. Surprisingly, they didn't live under the traditional culture where the oldest son inherited everything. Rather than focusing solely on the eldest, families nurtured whichever children showed exceptional talent. George Washington, the son of a second marriage, wasn't granted the elite English schooling his older half-brothers had, but he managed to gain guidance and an inheritance through his oldest brother, Lawrence. Benjamin Franklin, the 15th of 17 children, left his apprenticeship with an older brother to build a successful printing business in Philadelphia, becoming a wealthy man by 42, and contributed significantly to the founding of America, both in civic and scientific life. Proof that large families could produce remarkable leaders from beyond the firstborn. Carney says, if Franklin's father had stopped after his 14th child, there would have been no Poor Richard's Almanac, no electricity experiments, and no original proposals for colonial unity. Paul Revere, the third of 12 children, grew up in a bustling household where resourcefulness and cooperation were essential. Trained as a silversmith, Revere's practical skills and wide circle of acquaintances made him a natural communicator and organizer. In an era when large families often cultivated resilience and quick thinking, Revere's upbringing prepared him for his role as a patriot messenger and leader in the American Revolution, most famously on his midnight ride to warn of the British advance. If these families had been following modern trends of our day, which equates to an average of 2 children per family, many of these leaders would not have been born. Many parents worry about the affordability of more children in today's economic climate, especially when they feel they are failing their children if they aren't prodigies by the age of 8, or on their way to earning full-ride scholarships or being drafted into the NBA. This expectation requires hours of dedicated coaching and practice and hundreds upon hundreds of dollars in investment for every child in the family. No wonder parents are exhausted and find the idea of a larger family unrealistic. According to Carney, the odds of raising a child with exceptional talents like Washington, Franklin, or Revere increases when parents have a large family rather than just 1 or 2 children. And having lower expectations for children will lessen the financial and emotional burden on the parents, not to mention the child themselves. Large families also face a lot of condemnation that they are selfishly consuming resources to provide for their children. A USA Today journalist, Teresa Olahan, comes from a family of 11 children. She's well acquainted with the modern view of big families. She mentioned that Prince Harry and Meghan Markle were recently given an award for limiting their family to 2 children to reduce environmental impact. Critics, including relatable host Allie Beth Stuckey, noted the irony, pointing out that their lavish lifestyle and frequent private jet use likely give them a larger carbon footprint than many bigger families living modestly. Teresa argues that while Harry and Meghan's family choices are personal, praising them for having fewer children is insulting to large families. It suggests big families are harmful, overlooking the value of children and their potential to positively impact society. She suggests that large families provide the structure and training to be responsible adults and make meaningful contributions to society. Her parents taught her responsibility and teamwork at home, encouraging everyone to help with tasks. From an early age, they learned practical skills and valued small sacrifices. Knowing each person's contribution kept the household running smoothly, strengthened family pride, and created a happier home. This training easily transfers to leadership within a community. Further, she says big families are miniature imitations of societies where diverse personalities learn to live together with patience, humility, and love, fostering strong bonds and loyalty. Children in large families enjoy constant companionship, free from the social pressures that often cause loneliness, depression, and anxiety among peers. During the COVID-19 lockdown, Teresa's parents welcomed all 11 children home, the first time they'd all been home together since leaving for college. There, they created cherished memories of togetherness during a time that could have been terrifying and lonely. The experience showed Teresa that love and human connection outweigh material success, and it deepened her gratitude for her parents' lifelong dedication to the personal development of each of their children. She said, "I am even more grateful for the greatest gift that they could have given us, each other." Now, I know this all sounds like a Hallmark-esque advertisement for having big families, but that's not exactly what we're trying to accomplish. Though we personally think big families are pretty cool, we aren't here to tell you how many kids to have. But we would like to explore and celebrate large families through stories. And we've got a couple of our favorites for you today. Now that we've been officially versed in all the benefits of a big family, let's focus on a couple of our favorite family stories. The 1970s TV series The Waltons and the 1948 novel Cheaper by the Dozen, not to be confused with the movie starring Steve Martin.
Though it is a good movie, it's just not the same as the original Cheaper by the Dozen story.
It is a super cute movie and I love it, but yes, it is
Wildly different.
It is not the novel. If you are a member of the younger generation, it's likely that you're not familiar with either the Waltons or the Gilbreth family. And if you are of a more mature age, then you might have some nostalgic recollection.
There you go, old timers.
Yep, old timers. But in this case, it really truly is old timers. Either way, we hope to create or reaffirm fans of these two great stories today. So without further ado, let's hear the story behind the story. Earl Hamner Jr. was the heart and voice behind the Waltons, drawing on his own upbringing in the small town of Schuyler, Virginia, to create the fictional world of Walton's Mountain. Born in 1923 as the eldest of 8 children, Hamner grew up during the Great Depression in a home brimming with stories, laughter, and the quiet heroism of everyday life. His father worked in a soapstone quarry, his mother kept the home running, and the children learned early about hard work, sacrifice, and the simple joys of family. Those formative years, full of shared meals, front porch evenings, and the pull of the Blue Ridge Mountains, became the foundation of his life's work. The Waltons premiered in 1972 and ran for 9 seasons, set in the rural Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia during the Great Depression and World War II. Inspired directly by Hamner's childhood, the show followed John and Olivia Walton and their 7 children as they navigated the challenges and joys of life on Walton's Mountain. Each episode unfolded like a heartfelt short story, blending humor, hardship, and hope in a way that resonated deeply with audiences. Viewers were invited into a world where neighbors knew each other's names, doors were always open, and the bonds of family offered comfort in even the leanest years. The magic of the Waltons is in the small, everyday moments. Conflicts were often simple. sibling squabbles, financial worries, moral dilemmas, but they were resolved with patience, understanding, and a quiet wisdom that reflected the best of rural American values. For many viewers, the Waltons became a second family, offering a vision of stability and love that felt both nostalgic and aspirational. What truly set the series apart was the warmth of its characters. John Walton Sr. embodied steady, hard-working fatherhood. Olivia brought moral strength and tender care. And each of the 7 children, John-Boy, Jason, Mary Ellen, Ben, Aaron, Jim Bob, and Elizabeth, had distinct personalities and dreams that gave the family depth and charm. Through their stories, audiences saw the universal struggles of growing up, choosing one's path, and learning the meaning of home. The Waltons' loyalty to one another, even in times of misunderstanding or disappointment, reinforced the idea that family is both a shelter and a shared adventure. Hamner's gentle Virginia accent, heard in his role as the show's narrator, bookended each episode with words that felt like they had been handed down from an old friend. Its signature goodnight exchanges, "Good night, Mary Ellen," "Good night, John Boy," became an iconic reminder of the show's central truth, that connection, kindness, and shared history are life's richest treasures. The beauty of the series lay in the way it portrayed family relationships, not as perfect, but as deeply committed, resilient, and rooted in love. John Boy, the oldest child of the Walton family, is somewhat of a feature in the show. The family is most often seen through his eyes as a writer. His poignant and wistful observations of his family are some of the most tender moments in the show. One night, while writing at his desk, he wrote, "As with most families everywhere, we were faced with all kinds of troubles, large and small. Some growing out of personal weaknesses, others thrust on us by our changing world. Mostly, when trouble struck, we drew together, united against the common enemy, and came out of the struggle closer than before. Growing up with my brothers and sisters on Walton's Mountain was a joyful experience, but not always an easy one. Privacy was hard to come by, and as a young man trying to write, it was the one thing I almost never had. I will always remember that day when I left, a young boy, anxious to find some time for myself, and returned a man who had partaken of a miracle." I have watched the Walton TV series twice, and I'm currently working on a 3rd time through. I turn to it anytime I just want to feel good. It's a testament to the power the Walton family possesses that I find strength, restoration, and assurance within their fold. And now for a change of tone and pace. I'd like to introduce you to one of my top 10 favorite books, Cheaper by the Dozen. Written by 2 of the children, Frank Jr. and Ernestine, Cheaper by the Dozen is a laugh-out-loud true story of the Gilbreth family. The parents, Frank and Lillian, are pioneering efficiency experts who bring their time-saving experiments home to help raise their 12 children. The Gilbreth home is no ordinary place. Frank Sr. approaches parenting with the same experimental zeal he applies to factory work, turning chores into competitions, introducing Morse code at the dinner table, and using phonograph records to teach languages while the children brush their teeth. Lillian, equally brilliant, but with a softer touch, balances his larger-than-life personality with warmth, patience, and a gift for understanding each child's unique needs. Together, they create a home that is equal parts laboratory, circus, and love-filled refuge. The story's charm comes from its quick, witty storytelling and the author's affectionate portrayal of their parents. Frank Jr. and Ernestine write with a mix of humor and poignancy, capturing their father's booming confidence and offbeat schemes, as well as their mother's grace under pressure. It's a tribute to 2 remarkable parents who believe in making every minute count, not just for efficiency's sake, but to fill their children's lives with adventure, learning, and love. Although the Gilbreth family could be larger than life in many respects, they too felt grounded and connected by the small, simple, everyday acts of life. Frank Jr. and Ernestine reminisced, "It's not so much the big things that you remember. It's the little things. The way Dad would whistle in the mornings, the smell of Mother's bread baking, the sound of everyone talking at once around the dinner table. Those are the things that stay with you." The Frank and Lillian Gilbreth family may no longer be with us in flesh and blood, but they are alive in the pages of a story that overflows with humor, warmth, and the timeless reminder that family life, no matter how chaotic, can be filled with love, laughter, and unforgettable moments. We'd like to present the first 2 chapters from the book Cheaper by the Dozen by Frank Jr. and Ernestine Gilbreth. Now, here's the story. Dad was a tall man with a large head, jowls, and a Herbert Hoover collar. He was no longer slim. He had passed the 200-pound mark during his early 30s and left it so far behind that there were times when he had to resort to railway baggage scales to ascertain his displacement. But he carried himself with the self-assurance of a successful gentleman who was proud of his wife, proud of his family, and proud of his business accomplishments. Dad had enough gall to be divided into 3 parts, and the ability and poise to backstop the front he placed before the world. He'd walk into a factory like the Zeiss Works in Germany or the Pierce Aero Plant in this country and announce that he could speed up production by 1/4. He'd do it, too. One reason he had so many children, there were 12 of us, was that he was convinced anything he and Mother teamed up on was sure to be a success. Dad always practiced what he preached, and it was just about impossible to tell where his scientific management company ended and his family life began. His office was always full of children, and he often took 2 or 3 of us, and sometimes all 12, on business trips. Frequently, we'd tag along at his side, pencils and notebooks in our hands, when Dad toured a factory which had hired him as an efficiency expert. On the other hand, our house at Montclair, New Jersey, was a sort of school for scientific management and the elimination of wasted motions, or motion study, as Dad and Mother named it. Dad took moving pictures of us children washing dishes so that he could figure out how we could reduce our motions and thus hurry through the task. Irregular jobs, such as painting the back porch or removing a stump from the front lawn, were awarded on a low-bid basis. Each child who wanted extra pocket money submitted a sealed bid saying what he would do the job for. The lowest bidder got the contract. Dad installed process and work charts in the bathrooms. Every child old enough to write, and Dad expected his offspring to start writing at a tender age, was required to initial the charts in the morning after he had brushed his teeth, taken a bath, combed his hair, and made his bed. At night, each child had to weigh himself, plot the figure on a graph, and initial the process charts again after he had done his homework, washed his hands and face, and brushed his teeth. Mother wanted to have a place on the charts for saying prayers, but Dad said as far as he was concerned, prayers were voluntary. It was regimentation, all right, but bear in mind the trouble most parents have in getting just 1 child off to school and multiply it by 12. Some regimentation was necessary to prevent bedlam. Of course, there were times when a child would initial the charts without actually having fulfilled the requirements. However, Dad had a gimlet eye and a terrible swift sword. The combined effect was that truth usually went marching on. Yes, at home or on the job, Dad was always the efficiency expert. He buttoned his vest from the bottom up instead of from the top down, because the bottom to top process took him only 3 seconds, while the top to bottom took 7. He even used 2 shaving brushes to lather his face, because he found that by so doing, he could cut 17 seconds off his shaving time. For a while, he tried shaving with 2 razors, but he finally gave up on that. "I can save 44 seconds, he grumbled, "but I wasted 2 minutes this morning putting this bandage on my throat." It wasn't the slashed throat that really bothered him. It was the 2 minutes. Some people used to say that Dad had so many children he couldn't keep track of them. Dad himself used to tell a story about one time when Mother went off to fill a lecture engagement and left him in charge at home. When Mother returned, she asked him if everything had run smoothly. "Didn't have any trouble except with that one over there," he replied. "But a spanking brought him into line." Mother could handle any crisis without losing her composure. "That's not one of ours, dear," she said. "He belongs next door." None of us remembers it, and maybe it never happened. Dad wasn't above stretching the truth, because there was nothing he liked better than a joke, particularly if it were on him, and even more particularly if it were on Mother. This much is certain, though. There were 2 red-haired children who lived next door, and the Gilbreths are all blondes or redheads. Although he was a strict taskmaster within his home, Dad tolerated no criticism of the family from outsiders. Once a neighbor complained that a Gilbreth had called the neighbor's boy a son of an unprintable word. "What are the facts of the matter?" Dad asked blandly, and then walked away while the neighbor registered a double take. But Dad hated unprintable words, and the fact that he had stood up for his son did not prevent him from holding a full dress court of inquiry once he got home, and administering the called-for punishment. Dad was happiest in a crowd, especially a crowd of kids. Wherever he was, you'd see a string of them trailing along, and the ones with plenty of freckles were pretty sure to be Gilbreths. He had a way with children and knew how to keep them on their toes. He had a respect for them, too, and didn't mind showing it. He believed that most adults stopped thinking the day they left school, and some even before that. A child, on the other hand, stays impressionable and eager to learn. Catch one young enough, Dad insisted, and there's no limit to what you can teach. Really, it was love of children, more than anything else, that made him want a pack of his own. Even with a dozen, he wasn't fully satisfied. Sometimes he'd look us over and say to Mother, "Never you mind, Lily. You did the best you could." We children used to suspect, though, that one reason he had wanted a large family was to assure himself of an appreciative audience, even within the confines of the home. With us around, he could always be sure of a full house packed to the galleries. Whenever Dad returned from a trip, even if he had been gone only a day, he whistled the family assembly call as he turned in at the sidewalk of our large brown home in Montclair. The call was a tune he had composed. He whistled it, loud and shrill, by doubling his tongue behind his front teeth. It took considerable effort, and Dad, who never exercised if he could help it, usually ended up puffing with exhaustion. The call was important. It meant drop everything and come running or risk dire consequences. At the first note, Gilbreth children came dashing from all corners of the house and yard. Neighborhood dogs, barking hellishly, converged for blocks around. Heads popped out of the windows of nearby houses. Dad gave the whistle often. He gave it when he had an important family announcement that he wanted to be sure everyone would hear. He gave it when he was bored and wanted some excitement with his children. He gave it when he invited a friend home and wanted both to introduce the friend to the whole family and to show the friend how quickly the family could assemble. On such occasions, Dad would click a stopwatch, which he always carried in his vest pocket. Like most of Dad's ideas, the assembly call, while something more than a nuisance, made sense. This was demonstrated in particular one day when a bonfire of leaves in the driveway got out of control and spread to the side of the house. Dad whistled, and the house was evacuated in 14 seconds, 8 seconds off the all-time record. That occasion was also memorable because of the remarks of a frank neighbor who watched the blaze from his yard. During the height of the excitement, the neighbor's wife came to the front door and called to her husband. "What's going on?" "The Gilbreth's house is on fire," he replied. "Thank God." "Shall I call the fire department?" she shouted. "What's the matter? Are you crazy?" the husband answered incredulously. Anyway, the fire was put out quickly, and there was no need to ask the fire department for help. Dad whistled assembly when he wanted to find out who had been using his razors or who had spilled ink on his desk. He whistled it when he had special jobs to assign or errands to be run, mostly, though. He sounded the assembly call when he was about to distribute some wonderful surprises, with the biggest and best going to the one who reached him first. So when we heard him whistle, we never knew whether to expect good news or bad, rags or riches, but we did know for sure we'd better get there in a hurry. Sometimes, as we all came running to the front door, he'd start by being stern. "Let me see your nails, all of you," he'd grunt, with his face screwed up in a terrible frown. "Are they clean? Have you been biting them? Do they need trimming?" Then out would come leather manicure sets for the girls and pocket knives for the boys. How we loved him then, when his frown wrinkles reversed their field and became a wide grin. Or he'd shake hands solemnly all around, and when you took your hand away, there'd be a nut chocolate bar in it. Or he'd ask who had a pencil, and then hand out a dozen automatic ones. "Let's see, what time is it?" he asked once. Out came wristwatches for all, even the 6-week-old baby. "Oh, Daddy, they're just right," we'd say. And when we'd throw our arms around him and tell him how much we missed him, he would choke up and wouldn't be able to answer. So he'd rumple our hair and slap our bottoms instead. There were other surprises, too. Boxes of Page and Shaw candy, dolls and toys, cameras from Germany, wool socks from Scotland, a dozen Plymouth Rock hens, and 2 sheep that were supposed to keep the lawn trimmed, but died, poor creatures, from the combined effects of saddle sores, too much petting, and tail pulling. The sheep were fun while they lasted, and it is doubtful if any pair of quadrupeds ever have been sheared so often by so many. "If I ever bring anything else alive into this household," Dad said, "I hope the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals hails me into court and makes me pay my debt to society. I never felt so ashamed about anything in my life as I do about those sheep, so help me." When Dad bought the house in Montclair, he described it to us as a tumble-down shanty in a run-down neighborhood. We thought this was another one of his surprises, but he finally convinced us that the house was a hovel. "It takes a lot of money to keep this family going," he said. "Food, clothes, allowances, doctor's bills, getting teeth straightened, and buying ice cream sodas. I'm sorry, but I just couldn't afford anything better. We'll have to fix it up best we can and make it do." We were living at Providence, Rhode Island at the time. As we drove from Providence to Montclair, Dad would point to every termite trap we passed. It looks something like that one," he would say. "Only it has a few more broken windows and the yard is maybe a little smaller." As we entered Montclair, he drove through the worst section of town and finally pulled up to an abandoned structure that even Dracula wouldn't have felt at home in. "Well, here it is," he said. "Home. All out." "You're joking, aren't you, dear?" Mother said hopefully. "What's the matter with it? Don't you like it?" "If it's what you want, dear," said Mother, I'm satisfied, I guess." "It's a slum, that's what's the matter with it," said Ernestine. "No one asked your opinion, young lady," replied Dad. "I was talking to your mother, and I will thank you to keep out of the conversation." "You're welcome," said Ernestine, who knew she was treading on thin ice but was too upset to care. "You're welcome, I'm sure. Only I wouldn't live in it with a 10-foot pole." "Neither would I," said Martha. "Not with 2 10-foot poles." "Hush," Mother said. "Daddy knows best." Lil started to sob. "It won't look so bad with a coat of paint and a few boards put in where those holes are," Mother said cheerfully. Dad, grinning now, was fumbling in his pocket for his notebook. By jingo, kids, now wait a second," he crowed. "Wrong address. Well, what do you know? Pile back in. I thought this place looked a little more run down than when I last saw it." And then he drove us to 68 Eagle Rock Way, which was an old but beautiful Taj Mahal of a house with 14 rooms, a 2-story barn out back, a greenhouse, chicken yard, grape arbors, rose bushes, and a couple of dozen fruit trees. At first, we thought that Dad was teasing us again, and that this was the other end of the scale, a house much better than the one he had bought. "This is really it," he said. "The reason I took you to that other place first, and the reason I didn't try to describe this place to you is, well, I didn't want you to be disappointed. Forgive me?" We said we did. Dad had bought the automobile a year before we moved. It was our first car, and cars were still a novelty. Of course, that had been a surprise, too. He had taken us all for a walk and had ended up at a garage where the car had been parked. Although Dad made his living by redesigning complicated machinery so as to reduce the number of human motions required to operate it, he never really understood the mechanical intricacies of our automobile. It was a gray Pierce Arrow equipped with 2 bulb horns and an electric klaxon, which Dad would try to blow all at the same time when he wanted to pass anyone. The engine hood was long and square, and you had to raise it to prime the petcocks on cold mornings. Dad had seen the car in the factory and fallen in love with it. The affection was entirely one-sided and unrequited. He named it Foolish Carriage because he said it was foolish for any man with as many children as he to think he could afford a horseless carriage. The contraption kicked him when he cranked, spat oil in his face when he looked into its bowels, squealed when he mashed the brakes, and rumbled ominously when he shifted gears. Sometimes Dad would spit, squeal, and rumble back, but he never won a single decision. Frankly, Dad didn't drive our car well at all, but he did drive it fast. He terrified all of us, but particularly Mother. She sat next to him in the front seat with 2 of the babies on her lap and alternated between clutching Dad's arm and closing her eyes in supplication. Whenever we rounded a corner, she would try to make a shield out of her body to protect the babies from what she felt sure would be mutilation or death. "Not so fast, Frank, not so fast," she would whisper through clenched teeth. But Dad never seemed to hear. Foolish Carriage was a right-hand drive, so whoever sat to the left of Mother and the babies on the front seat had to be on the lookout to tell Dad when he could pass the car ahead. "You can make it," the lookout would shout. "Put out your hand," Dad would holler. 11 hands, everybody contributing 1 except Mother and the babies, would emerge from both sides of the car, from the front seat, rear seat, and the folding swivel chairs amidships. We had seen Dad nick fenders, slaughter chickens, square away with traffic policemen, and knock down full-grown trees, and we weren't taking any chances. The lookout on the front seat was Dad's own idea. The other safety measures, which we soon inaugurated as a matter of self-preservation, were our own. We would assign someone to keep a lookout for cars approaching on side streets to the left, someone to keep an identical lookout to the right, and someone to kneel on the rear seat and look through the isinglass window in the back. "Car coming from the left, Dad," one lookout would sing out. "2 coming from the right. Motorcycle approaching from astern." I see them, Dad would say irritably, although usually he didn't. "Don't you have any confidence at all in your father?" He was especially fond of the electric horn, an ear-splitting gadget which bellowed "Kadooga!" in an awe-inspiring metallic baritone. How Dad could manage to blow this and the 2 bulb horns, step on the gas, steer the car, shout "Roadhog! Roadhog!" and smoke a cigar all at the same time is in itself a tribute to his abilities as a motion study expert. A few days after he bought the car, he brought each of us children up to it, 1 at a time, raised the hood, and told us to look inside and see if we could find the birdie in the engine. While our backs were turned, he tiptoed back to the driver's seat and pressed down on the horn. "Kadooga! Kadooga!" The horn blaring right in your ear was frightening, and you'd jump away in hurt amazement. Dad would laugh until the tears came to his eyes. "Did you see the birdie?" He'd scream. "I'll bet you jumped 6 9/10 inches." One day, while we were returning from a particularly trying picnic, the engine balked, coughed, spat, and stopped. Dad was sweaty and sleepy. We children had gotten on his nerves. He ordered us out of the car, which was overheated and steaming. He wrestled with the back seat to get the tools. It was stuck, and he kicked it. He took off his coat, rolled up his sleeves, and raised the left-hand side of the hood. Dad seldom swore, an occasional damn, perhaps, but he believed in setting a good example. Usually he stuck to such phrases as, "By Jingo," and "Holy Moses." He said them both now, only there was something frightening in the way he rolled them out. His head and shoulders disappeared into the inside of the hood. You could see his shirt, wet through, sticking to his back. Nobody noticed Bill. He had crawled into the front seat, and then, "Kadooga! Kadooga!" Dad jumped so high he actually toppled into the engine, leaving his feet dangling in midair. His head butted the top of the hood, and his right wrist came up against the red-hot exhaust pipe. You could hear the flesh sizzle. Finally, he managed to extricate himself. He rubbed his head and left grease across his forehead. He blew on the burned wrist. He was livid. "Holy hell!" he screamed, as if he had been saving this oath since his wedding day for just an occasion. "Holy damn it to hell! Who did that?" "Mercy, Maud," said Mother, which was the closest she ever came to swearing too. Bill, who was 6 and always in trouble anyway, was the only one with nerve enough to laugh, but it was a nervous laugh at that. Did you see the birdie, Daddy?" he asked. Dad grabbed him, and Bill stopped laughing. "That was a good joke on you, Daddy," Bill said hopefully, but there wasn't much confidence in his voice. "There is a time," Dad said through his teeth, "and there is a place for birdies. And there is a time and place for spankings." "I'll bet you jumped 6 9/10 inches, Daddy," said Bill, stalling for time now. Dad relaxed and let him go. "Yes, Billy, by Jingo," he said. "That was a good joke on me, and I suspect I did jump 6 9/10 inches. Dad loved a joke on himself, all right, but he loved it best a few months after the joke was over and not when it was happening. The story about Bill and the birdie became one of his favorites. No one ever laughed harder at the end of the story than Dad. Unless it was Bill, by Jingo.
Well done, babe. Once again, I love that story so much, the Cheaper by the Dozen and the Waltons, and I think you've made some excellent points about big families and family in general and the importance of family. You did a great job.
Well, thank you.
It reminds me of an article I read a few years ago by David Brooks, who often writes for The Atlantic, New York Times. He's a really good author, really good thinker. And the title of his article is "The Nuclear Family Was a Mistake." And when I first read that, I thought it might be some kind of anti-family stance, which I was really surprised about from David Brooks. But as you get into it, he actually makes the point that it's not so much that he's against the nuclear family, but he's against the isolation and the smallness of the nuclear family as symptoms of some of the things that are wrong in society. I thought it was just a really interesting angle. And I want to read one of the things that he says. If you want to summarize the changes in family structure over the past century, the truest thing to say is this. We've made life freer for individuals and more unstable for families. We've made life better for adults, but worse for children. We've moved from big, interconnected, and extended families, which helped protect the most vulnerable people in society from the shocks of life, to smaller, detached, nuclear families, a married couple and their children, which gives the most privileged people in society room to maximize their talents and expand their options. The shift from bigger and interconnected extended families to smaller and detached nuclear families ultimately led to a familial system that favors the rich and ravages the working class and the poor.
Yeah, it's pretty harsh.
Yeah, it's very strong language, and it's worth looking up and reading his article again, March 2020 from the Atlantic, because it's actually a 2-part article, and he goes into quite a lot of depth to make his point, and it's quite compelling. And ultimately, I think he makes the same point the other articles were making that you had mentioned, that in his words, the family doesn't have to necessarily have lots of children, but it should be extended and connected. Maybe more like the Waltons, where there are grandparents and parents and children that live in the same home or very nearby each other. And he goes on and on to explain that this extended family idea is what really protected people. Like if you had someone who was falling on hard times, if you had someone who's having a difficulty, there are lots of people, lots of resources around to help that person. Whereas if they're just 3 of you or 4 of you, and something bad happens in that relationship, it can destabilize your family, and you may not recover. And you look at the stats for increasing divorce rates and increasing isolation and how people are feeling, and it's hard not to see that he has a point.
Right. I think the Waltons are actually a really good example of this very thing, because they do have a multi-generation situation where the grandparents live there with them. Obviously, the parents are the ones who are in charge of the kids, but the grandparents are there to give support. But you think about the time period when their family was living. The Great Depression was very, very hard on their family. The grandparents were actually able to step in and really help fortify and help the family financially. And I think what would happen to that family if the grandparents weren't there? They all pulled together, even the kids, they all pulled together to help get them through those lean times during the Great Depression.
Yeah. And, the older kids helping the younger kids, and this idea that being part of a big family sort of forces everyone to learn a little bit about who they are and how they can contribute and how they interact with other people. And because no one is the sole focus of the family's efforts, each child has to kind of navigate and blossom in their own unique way. And if the parents and the grandparents are able to support all of that generally, then everyone has a better chance of finding their mission and their passion for life.
Yeah.
Well, and David Brooks goes on to explain that this applies also to the families that we choose. So in some situations, you may not have grandparents stepping in to help busy parents or older brothers and sisters, but you might have your community, your neighbors or people that you're close to, or even, as you often see in stories, there'll be a quote unquote uncle or aunt character that's really just a friend of the family. And perhaps they're single and they don't have children, but they are able to connect with a family unit and really become an integral part of that family and do the same thing. So his point is, whether it's an extended family or a family you choose, these are things that can strengthen you and that are missing by and large in our society today. His term for families we choose, he applies the term kinship. And he points out, for example, there's Native people in Micronesia that have a saying. They say, "My sibling from the same canoe." If 2 people survive a dangerous trial at sea, then they become kin. They become bonded. It reminds me of sometimes I used to see when I was a kid, always made me laugh, but I think it's cool. And they would talk about, it was like 2 guys and he'd say, "Oh, it's my brother from another mother," kind of thing. Same idea,
Yes.
right? And it's about this bonding that can happen that creates important relationships. David Brooks says, for vast stretches of human history, people lived in extended families consisting not just of the people that they were biologically related to, but people that they could choose to cooperate with and engage with and have deep, meaningful relationships with. I think you said something about the large family fostering those deep and meaningful and connected relationships that are what provide the resilience. They're what help you bounce back and know you have a support system and give you confidence. And we need that in our society, whether through a traditionally big family, Ben Franklin's 17 kids or whatever it is, or perhaps an extended family or a combination of families that are connected to other families and other people in a close-knit community. I think any of those things can have these same benefits.
So I guess another good term for that would be a safety net. Somewhere where you can go, especially in times of trouble. It makes me think of the USA Today journalist Teresa Olahan and how she talked about the COVID-19 lockdown and how all of her siblings at that point were, college or at least off on their own. And if they had stayed in their own places, how kind of like dark and lonely and terrifying that could have been for each one of them. But their parents welcomed them home, and they were able to experience that time together in a way that was very different than you would think during the COVID-19 lockdown. It was actually a very happy time for them. And I just think about that and how that was a safety net for all 11 of those children.
Yeah, that's a great point. David Brooks says, speaking of big families or families we choose, another term he uses is a forged family, which kind of applies to both, right? Like whether it's a biological or one you choose, it does have to be forged. And it usually happens through a little bit of hardship and adversity. And that pulling together is what makes it happen. That idea is particularly American. We've talked about this on some of our episodes before, but when I think about the story of America and American literature, it starts right away with this idea of honoring family and also knowing that all family has to be chosen, whether you're born into it or not. You have to choose to work at those relationships. So we talk about founding fathers and nurturing mothers, and we talk about brothers in arms, and all of these phrases are family phrases for a reason. And I think American literature does a great job reflecting how America sees family. When I was studying that in college, one of the courses I took, we were doing like a survey of literature from the founding kind of all the way through modern times. And with every novel, the question was, what does this novel say about the family? How do you see the family changing, evolving? And that was like a really powerful experience for me, because kind of opened my eyes to seeing the value of family and family relationships in any time and in any circumstance, and what changes and what stays the same. And what stays the same are the sacrifice and the commitment and the resilience and the love for one another. That's what family does for one another. I think of like James Fenimore Cooper's Last of the Mohicans. That's a great story about the founders and bringing together not only European colonial settlers, but also Native American tribes, and showing that both respected family, both have nobility, and the ones who are noble and act with honor, they're the ones that survive and become the grandparents of the founding generation. It's a great story. Whenever I mention the Scarlet Letter, I know people roll their eyes because it's like, I was forced to read that in 8th grade, but it's a great story. And part of a really important part of that story is you have Hester Prynne, who's the mother of this daughter, Pearl, and you have these two other characters, right, Dimmesdale and Chillingsworth, who are the men who are supposed to be the fathers, but this story is about them refusing to acknowledge their fatherhood and refusing to participate, and the damage it ultimately does them, whereas Hester fully acknowledges that she's a mother to little Pearl and becomes a matron to the whole community, to the point where at the end of her life, they think that the Scarlet Letter, A, that stood for adultery, actually stands for angel, because she acted like a mother. You also see the same thing in Huckleberry Finn, which is, I think, universally acknowledged as probably the best American novel still. And it's because he makes such a powerful point, about culture and about slavery and about that through, Huck Finn and of course, his quote unquote runaway slave, Jim. Those two act like family to each other more than anyone else in their lives. And you can see by the end of the novel that that's what a real family looks like. And I think David Brooks's larger point, and he says this in his article, it's not about just a family can look like anything, so don't be judgmental, family, you choose your family kind of thing. He's like, I'm not really making that point. I'm saying that you can choose your family and you must choose your family. And it's less of a you do you in a hyper individualistic way and more of a family as family does. If you are showing signs in your relationship of commitment, sacrifice, honor, love, respect, then you're forming a family. And that's the kind of stuff that's going to save us from the ills of society or the hardships in the world. Interestingly, we're talking about the value of big families, of extended families, about communities, and we think about some of the problems we have. And we're dealing with fear and loneliness and anxiety and those isolatedness, and we're also dealing with housing crisis, right? We're the younger generation is finding it harder and harder to establish their own separate home with their kids. And it's an interesting question to think if society and the economics and everything else forces us to maybe return to this extended family, if children and grandchildren live with grandparents or grandparents live with children and start helping out, could that be a solution to things like anxiety, loneliness, and even solve a housing crisis?
Okay, well, going back to where we started with some thoughts from Michael Barone in a different article entitled, "With Its Roots in the Nuclear Family, the Nation Evolves into America 3.0." Barone refers to authors James Bennett and Michael Lotus, who say the country has gone through three main stages: agricultural America 1.0, industrial America 2.0, and now a shift toward an information age America 3.0. Barone says that what makes their perspective unique is how far back they trace our national character, over 1,000 years, to the Anglo-Saxon settlers who brought a strong tradition of the absolute nuclear family. In this model, people choose their own spouses, women have a measure of equality, children grow up to form their own households, and inheritance isn't automatically guaranteed. It's a family structure that values independence, responsibility, and opportunity, qualities that have shaped America from the very beginning. This family foundation encouraged property ownership, small business, and a belief in individual rights under the law. In the early days of America 1.0, government was small and local, and people were expected to take care of themselves and each other. The industrial era 2.0 brought bigger cities, large corporations, and a stronger central government, especially during World War II, when national unity and centralized control were at their peak. But over time, that heavy-handed model began to break down. Big government became bloated, businesses less agile, and social programs harder to fund as birth rates fell. Bennett and Lotus believe the future, America 3.0, will need to look a lot like the past in some ways. They picture families living further out, working more for themselves than for big companies, and government power returning to states and communities. At the heart of their vision is a culture built on strong, self-reliant families who raise responsible, capable citizens. And that's where the biblical family comes in. Just as America's earliest roots were nourished by strong family ties, our nation's trajectory depends on our willingness to strengthen homes again. Homes where marriage is honored, children are raised with love and discipline, and faith shapes daily life. Reviving the biblical family isn't just about tradition, it's about giving the next generation the foundation they'll need to keep America strong and healthy. So maybe we don't want to dictate how many children you should have, but we do want to encourage a family-friendly, family-centered country because families are the basic building block of a healthy nation. But let's bring it even closer. Family is what we need personally to have a healthy, happy, productive life. Hopefully the two stories that we shared today have adequately illustrated the power and impact families can have within themselves and their communities. Maybe you don't have the best family situation, and maybe it's caused some feelings of bitterness or angst. We totally understand. Families aren't perfect. They can be messy and complicated. But families don't always have to be traditional. A chosen family can be just as beneficial. Whether or not Bennett and Lotus's predictions about the future of America come true, it is true that a return to family as the core of American values will strengthen and ground our nation, making us more resilient and prepared to face whatever the future holds. Historically, it is the family that has been at the very center of America's exceptionalism. For the moment, we have become blurry-eyed and lost sight of that, and it's time we recovered and restored it to its rightful place. We have the power to write a new story about family, and I hope we can write it as well as John-Boy did for the Waltons, and Frank Jr. and Ernestine did for the Gilbreths. Let's write a family story for the ages, a story that future generations can love and believe in. We'd like to thank our sources for helping to tell our story today. My parents have 11 children. Here's why I'm grateful to be part of a big family, by Teresa Olahan, USA Today. Could larger families produce better leaders, as in the early days of the nation, by Michael Barone, Creators Syndicate. Family Unfriendly by Tim Carney.
And I'd like to add in The Nuclear Family is a Mistake by David Brooks from The Atlantic.
The Waltons TV series, you can view all 9 seasons on Prime Video, and I highly recommend you do.
You can even loop them so you can watch it 3 times through.
That's right. Cheaper by the Dozen by Frank Jr. and Ernestine Gilbreth. This is just such a fun, fast read, and it's just so worth it. And then when you're done with that, you can go ahead and watch the film Cheaper by the Dozen with Steve Martin, even though other than having 12 children, it is not remotely the same.
Not at all. But you do get to see Bonnie Hunt and Steve Martin as parents of a big family, and they are 2 of my favorite actors to watch in family comedies, and it's very heartwarming. Good movie.
It is a good film. I actually really enjoy it. We'd like to thank you for joining us today and allowing us to help build your story reservoir. We hope you join us next week for another great story, but for now, goodbye.